The leather purse landed on the counter with a sound like a man running out of patience. It was not thrown. That was the thing Cecily noticed first, standing on the far side of the ledger stand, with her pen still held above the line she had been copying. He had placed it with precision, the way a man places something he does not wish to be seen holding any longer than necessary. The purse was dark, stitched, the kind that did not need to announce what it contained, because its weight was announcement enough. 2 apprentice boys at the type cases behind her had gone very still. The door to Milsom Street stood open to the November air, and a woman passing on the pavement outside glanced in without slowing. And Cecily thought for a moment that the whole of Bath could see her standing in the print shop with a lord's gold in front of her, and her hands too rigid to set down her pen. Edmund Forsyth, Earl of Ashwick, looked at her with the expression of a man who had not slept, and did not intend to explain why. He was taller than she had expected when she had first heard his name spoken. Broad, across the shoulders, in a coat of such dark navy, it held the November light differently than the room around it. His jaw was clean-shaved and set as if it had been carved into that arrangement and not permitted to soften since. His eyes were gray, a particular gray that was almost dark enough to be blue but held back from it, and they fixed on Cecily with an attention so deliberate she could feel the edges of it. "Miss Pratt," he said. His voice was low and level. "I believe you understand why I am here." She had understood since the prior evening, when a card had been left at Mrs. Good's door with the Ashwick seal pressed into the wax. She had lain awake holding it, this small proof that the world had noticed her, and not with the quality of attention one wished to earn. She had thought, in the small hours, of what Lady Dorothea Forsyth had said to her son at the assembly rooms 4 nights ago, when Cecily had been standing near the pillar at the edge of the room with her employer's invitation, and no one else's. She had not been meant to hear it. She did not think she was meant to be in earshot at all. The words reached her with the particular clarity of something that would not be taken back. "She is a printer's girl," the dowager had said, her fan moving at its measured height, her voice calibrated to carry only so far as it intended. "She will take the money." Cecily set down her pen. She did not touch the purse. "I understand," she said, "that you have come to offer me a sum in exchange for returning the documents and keeping whatever I may have read in them to myself." "That is one way to phrase it," he said. She had not meant it as an invitation to offer another. Her name was Cecily Pratt, and she was 24 years old in the autumn of 1814, and she had been in Bath for 11 months, which was not long enough to have formed the kinds of alliances that might have protected her from the moment she was now living through. She had come from Salisbury in January, 3 weeks after burying her father in the churchyard attached to the parish where she had spent her entire life. Mr. Absalom Pratt had been a solicitor's clerk for 31 years, a man of good sense and modest means, and a particular passion for the exactness of language that he had passed to his daughter like a handed-down piece of silver, well worn, but still fine. He had not left her much when he died. He had left her his library, his handwriting, a reference to Mr. Orton's printing establishment on Milsom Street, and a letter. The letter was folded into quarters and lived in the inner pocket of her working coat, beside her heart, and she had read it enough times that she could have spoken it aloud from memory in the dark. Her father had written it at the beginning of his final illness, when he could still sit up. She had found it on his desk after the funeral, sealed with a plain wafer, and addressed in his hand to her, simply, with the words, "For Cicely, when she has need of it." She had opened it that same evening, alone in the house that would shortly be closed and let. He had written about honesty the way other men wrote about land or capital, as the only form of wealth that could not be taken, the only kind that compounded rather than diminished when spent. He had written, "A man who values his name above his honor has none left to lose. Keep yours. It will not make you rich. It will make you something better." She had kept it. She kept everything her father gave her. At Mr. Orton's establishment, she was employed as a copyist and ledger checker, which meant that she sat for 8 hours a day at a high desk and moved words from one form to another with a fidelity that Mr. Orton said was the best he had encountered in 30 years of the trade. The work did not pay lavishly. It paid reliably, which was a distinction she had come to appreciate as she appreciated the difference between a fire that burned steady and one that burned bright. She was not unhappy. She was careful, which was the version of happiness available to her. The documents had come 3 weeks ago, in a commission from the solicitors Harbin and Mace. They were to be copied in full, 4 identical sets, for distribution to various interested parties in a matter concerning the Forsyth estate. The commission was not unusual. Documents of that kind passed through Mr. Orton's hands regularly. The printing establishment served half the legal community in Bath and the surrounding country. Cecily had received the original sheaf without any particular attention and had begun copying. She was 4 pages in when the discrepancy caught her eye. She had read the phrase again, then again. The signature on the promissory note was not quite right. She knew signatures the way other people knew faces, from having spent years copying them, and this one had been written by someone who knew how the name ought to look but had never written it carelessly, which meant it had never been written naturally. There were 3 such notes in the sheaf. The same signature, rendered with the same careful impersonation, on instruments totaling £9,200. She had not said anything immediately. She had copied the documents as commissioned and kept the originals, which she was not supposed to keep. And she had lain awake in her lodgings trying to determine whether she was the sort of woman who went to a solicitor or the sort of woman who went nowhere and hoped the world resolved itself. Her father's letter had been in her coat pocket both nights she had tried to decide. She had not needed to read it. She already knew what it said. She had written a brief note to Harbin and Mace, informing them that she believed there were irregularities in certain instruments in the commission they had sent, and that she held the originals pending their instruction. She had sent the note on a Wednesday. By Friday evening, a sealed card with an Ashwick crest had been delivered to her door. She was thinking of all this, standing at the ledger counter while the leather purse sat between them, when the Earl said, "The sum contained there is £200. The apprentice boys were not pretending to work any longer. "I would ask you to step into the back office," Cecily said, without raising her voice. He did not argue. He moved in the direction she indicated, with the quietness of a man who was accustomed to having space made for him wherever he went, and had ceased to notice it. She came around the counter and spoke to the taller of the 2 apprentices without looking at the Earl. "James, close the street door, please." The back office was used for binding and storage. It smelled of glue and paper and the particular dustiness of accumulated pages, and it was small enough that 2 people standing in it were aware of each other in the way that 2 people in a large room were not. She set the purse down on the binding table and stood with her hands folded. She did not offer him a chair, partly because there was only one, and partly because she thought he would not take it. £200, she said, is a great deal of money. "Yes," he said, "it is. You believe it is enough to purchase my silence." Something moved at the edge of his jaw. Not the muscle giving way, but the effort of keeping it still. "I believe it is enough to compensate you fairly for any inconvenience the matter has caused." "The inconvenience," she said, "of having discovered that someone forged your brother's signature on £9,200 worth of promissory notes." He was quiet for a moment. "My late brother's signature," he said. "Yes," she said. "I know he is dead. I am sorry for it." He looked at her then with an expression she could not immediately name. Not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to it. As if she had spoken a phrase he had been braced against, and found instead that it did not land where he expected. She had meant it plainly. She had no quarrel with the dead man. "The documents," he said, "and your silence about their content. That is what I am asking." "I understand what you are asking," she said. She picked up the purse and held it out to him. "I cannot give you either." He did not take it immediately. He looked at her hand with the purse in it for a long enough moment that she was aware of the weight of the thing, and of the weight of what she was refusing, and of the particular quality of his attention, which was not the cold assessment she had anticipated. It was something more like recognition, though she could not have said of what. He took the purse. "I see," he said. "I'm not making a demand," she said. "I'm not threatening anything. I intend to refer the matter to Mr. Silas Trent at the magistrate's office, as I should have done when I first found the discrepancy. I wanted you to know that before I did." He left without another word. She listened to his footsteps cross the front room and the street door open and close, and then she stood in the back office for a moment with her hands at her sides, and she thought that the matter was done, and now there would be a great deal more to do. She was right. By the following morning she had received a second card, this one not from the Earl of Ashwick, but from his mother. The pump room on a Tuesday morning in November was not crowded, but it was sufficiently attended for any exchange within it to be considered public. Cecily had come for the water, which her landlady recommended for her constitution, and which she herself found tolerable if she did not think too carefully about what it tasted of. She was standing at the railing with her glass when Miss Honoria Whitmore appeared at her side with the purposefulness of a woman who had been positioned there. Miss Whitmore was everything the season required. She was dressed in a gown the color of winter sky, her hair dressed with a precision that suggested consultation. She looked at Cecily with the mild interest of someone looking at an unfamiliar piece of furniture. "I do not believe we have been introduced," she said, in the tone of someone who had been told exactly who Cecily was, and found the information uninteresting. "Though I understand Lord Ashwick visited the printing establishment on Milsom Street recently, about some trifling matter." She paused. "The printer's girl, they are saying." Cecily held her glass. "They are saying that about me?" "They are saying that about the situation," Miss Whitmore said pleasantly. "No one supposes you are the sort of person who would make anything of it." A woman at the far end of the room turned to look, and then turned away. Cecily finished her water and set down the glass with a steadiness she was proud of. "Thank you," she said. "I hope you enjoy the morning." She kept her face level until she was out of the room and into the cold of the street, and then she stood for a moment against the wall of the building with the November air against her cheeks, and she allowed herself to feel, privately and briefly, the full weight of being nobody that the season had decided on. Then she straightened, and she walked toward the address on Lady Dorothea's card, because she had said she would. And she was the sort of person who kept the appointments she agreed to. Lady Dorothea Forsyth received her in the drawing-room of a house on the Royal Crescent that had been taken for the season. Everything in the room was expensive, and arranged to demonstrate that expense without appearing to try. The dowager herself sat in a chair near the window, with her hands folded over a fan she was not using, and she looked at Cecily with the expression of a woman in absolute command of the room she occupied. "Sit down, Miss Pratt," she said. Cecily sat. "I am going to speak to you plainly," said Lady Dorothea, "because I believe you will appreciate plainness. My son visited you yesterday. He offered you a fair sum. You declined it. I should like to understand why. Because accepting it would require me to conceal something that ought not to be concealed, Cecily said. Lady Dorothea looked at her the way one might look at a piece of needlework that had been sewn slightly wrong. You are a copyist employed by a printing house, she said. The documents you handled came to you in a professional capacity. Discretion about the content of such documents is, I would have supposed, a matter of professional obligation. Discretion is one thing, Cecily said. Suppressing evidence of forgery is another. You are very certain it is forgery. I am very certain, Cecily said. The fan moved once. What is it you want, Miss Pratt? I do not want anything. I want to refer the matter to the appropriate authority, as I have already told Lord Ashwick I intend to do. Something passed across Lady Dorothea's face, a calculation so brief and controlled that Cecily almost missed it. My son is a good man, she said. In a difficult position. I believe that may be true, Cecily said, and she meant it, and she watched the dowager's eyes narrow very slightly at the absence of hostility in it. Because she had clearly been prepared for hostility. She did not get what she had prepared for. If you have stayed with Cecily this far, you already sense what she did not yet allow herself to see. Stay a little longer. What is coming will cost her something real. Lady Dorothea's method, when social pressure failed, was not to raise her voice. It was to shift the ground entirely. Cecily would learn that in the days that followed, which began with the arrival of the solicitor. His name was Mr. Baxter, and he came to the printing house the following afternoon, which was a Thursday, and he arrived at a time when Mr. Orton was away at his other premises on Cheap Street, and only Mrs. Good was in the front room sorting correspondence. Mrs. Good was 63 and had worked for Mr. Orton for nearly 30 years and had the steady quality of a woman who had outlasted most of the situations she had not initially known how to handle. There is a gentleman to see you, she said, appearing at the back office door. He says it is about the documents. The gentleman said it was about the documents in the way that something already decided is described as still open for discussion. He was perhaps 50, with the kind of face that had learned to arrange itself into helpful expressions without the feelings to support them. He set his hat on the binding table with proprietary ease. Miss Pratt, he said, I represent Harbin and Mace, and also certain interests connected to the Forsyth estate. I am here to give you an opportunity to reconsider the position you have taken. What position is that? She asked. You have refused a very reasonable offer from Lord Ashwick. You have indicated your intention to refer a private legal matter to a public authority. I am here to suggest that this course of action would be unwise, for you specifically. He placed a banknote on the table. It was larger than the sum in the leather purse. This is £500, Miss Pratt. It would represent a considerable improvement to your circumstances. She looked at the banknote. It was a great deal of money. It was, by any reasonable calculation, more than she would earn in 5 years of copying ledgers at Mr. Orton's establishment. She thought of her father's letter in her coat pocket, and she thought of what the Earl had looked like when he took back the purse she had returned to him, and she thought of the 3 names she did not yet know, and she thought there was something else here, something she did not yet understand the shape of. She picked up the banknote. She tore it in half, then in quarters, and set the pieces down on the table. My father taught me, she said, that silence has a cost. I am not prepared to pay it. Mr. Baxter stared at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite surprise, but something of each, and then he picked up his hat. Lady Dorothea said you would be difficult, he said. I am sure she said something more efficient than that. he left. And from the shadow of the stairwell that connected the back office to the upper storage floor, where he had entered without Mrs. Good observing him. Because the door to the street at the side of the building was rarely locked, and he had noticed this when he came the day before, Edmund stepped forward into the light. She turned. The shock of him there, the height of him, the dark coat, the face that had arranged itself into something she had no prior vocabulary for, made her take one step back before she caught herself. "How long have you been there?" she said. "Long enough," he said. His voice was different than it had been before. Something in it had moved, like a door opened on a room that had been closed. "You followed him here. I suspected he would come. I did not want you to face it without knowing someone was there." He paused. "I did not intend to announce myself." She looked at the torn banknote on the table. She looked at him. "You could have told me to do otherwise," she said. "You could have asked me, told me directly, not to go to Mr. Trent. You had ample opportunity." "Yes." "Why did you not?" He was quiet for a moment. He moved to the window of the back office, which looked out not onto Milsom Street, but onto the narrow court behind the building, where pigeons walked on the wet stone. "Because it would not have been right," he said at last, "and because I do not think you would have listened if it were not right. And because—" He stopped, the sentence unfinished. He was looking at the window, not at her. "I need to tell you something, Miss Pratt, about why I came here in the first place. And it is not what you think." She sat down because the binding stool was behind her, and she wanted to be steady for whatever was coming. He told her about his brother. His elder brother, Francis, who had been the Earl of Ashwick before Edmund, and who had been, he said this with the measured care of a man choosing every word, a man of appetites that outran his income by a considerable margin. Francis had borrowed against the family name with the confidence of a firstborn son who expected to have time to repay what he spent. He had died in a coaching accident 18 months ago, before anyone outside his immediate household understood the size of what he had left behind. And among what he had left behind were 3 promissory notes bearing a signature that was not quite right, held by 3 men in Bath who had extended credit in good faith and had no idea the signature they held was not legally the signature of the Earl of Ashwick. 3 men. Edmund said their names: a glover on Stall Street, a book dealer on Broad Street, a silversmith's family who had been in Bath for 2 generations. The combined sum of what they were owed was £9,200. "If those notes are presented under the forgery," Edmund said, "they are worthless. The men who hold them will have no legal recourse and no recovery. They extended credit to my family in good faith. My brother forged the name. I did not know until after he died, and then I began, quietly, to pay what I could. I have paid £3,000 of it in 18 months. I intended to pay the rest." He paused. "My mother believed the better solution was to recover the documents, to suppress the forgery entirely. She said it would protect the family name. And you came to buy my silence?" Cecily said. "I came because my mother asked me to, and because I could not think of a better answer fast enough." He turned from the window. He looked at her directly, and his face was very still. But the stillness was different now, not the carved arrangement she had seen at the counter, but the stillness of a man who has put something down. "I was wrong to come. I knew it when you handed the purse back." She thought about this for a long moment. She thought about her father's letter, and about the word honor, and about the difference between a man who was trying to protect a family name and a man who was trying to protect 3 innocent men in Bath who had done nothing wrong. She thought they were not quite the same man, or rather, they had been the same man until she handed back the purse. "The glover," she said. "The book dealer. The Silversmith's family." "Yes." "They will be named in any inquiry." "Yes." "And you will not be able to repay the full 9,000 in one sum." "Not immediately." "No." She looked at her hands. The ink was still on the outside edge of her right forefinger from the morning's copying. She thought of her father, who had been a solicitor's clerk for 31 years, and who would have said that a problem with a legal solution ought to have a legal solution applied to it. She thought the man standing in front of her was not the man she had expected him to be, and she did not yet know what to do with that. What she did not know yet was that Lady Dorothea had not waited to find out what Mr. Baxter would accomplish. The dowager's method, when 2 attempts failed, was not to abandon the field. It was to change what the field was about. By Friday morning, it was being said in certain drawing rooms in Bath that the irregularities in the Forsyth documents had come to light because a copyist employed by Orton's on Milsom Street had been reading private legal correspondence beyond the scope of her commission and had chosen to make the contents known. The words used were careful. They did not say she had stolen anything. They said she had been indiscreet. They said she had overstepped. They said. And this was the version that moved fastest, because it had the particular momentum of a thing said by someone with enough authority that people do not examine it closely. That she had seen an opportunity to make herself significant and had taken it. Mr. Orton heard it at his club on Friday evening. He came to find Cecily on Saturday morning with the expression of a man trying to reconcile 2 things that would not quite fit together. She had never given him any cause for concern. She had also, he said, handled a very delicate commission in a way that had caused his establishment to be mentioned in connection with a noble family's private difficulties, and he did not see how that could be good for his business. He did not dismiss her. He asked her to take 2 weeks of leave while matters settled. She went to her lodgings. Mrs. Good came by in the afternoon with a dish of stewed pears, which was her method of expressing concern. Cecily sat with the pears untouched on the table and took the letter from her coat pocket and read it. She had read it perhaps 40 times, but she had never read it from the position of sitting in a cold room in Bath in November with 2 weeks of leave and no salary, and a solicitor's banknotes in pieces somewhere in an alley off Milsom Street, and the whole city deciding what she was. She read it again. A man who values his name above his honor has none left to lose. Keep yours. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about what it meant to be named a thing clearly and repeatedly by people who had never once met her. She thought about the pump room and the printer's girl and Mr. Baxter's face when she tore the note. She thought about the Earl at the window of the back office, his voice telling her about a dead brother and 3 innocent men, and the way his face had looked when he was not performing dignity, but simply inhabiting it. She thought about the word buried. She had overheard it used that week, more than once, in reference to her prospects, something that could be buried cleanly and forgotten. She folded the letter. She put it back. She put on her coat. On Saturday afternoon, she wrote to Mr. Silas Trent. The inquiry was not theatrical. The magistrate's office had arranged the use of a room at the assembly rooms on Monday morning, before the building was required for its more customary purposes, and it was attended by the solicitors, Harbin and Mace, by Mr. Baxter, by a representative of the Forsyth family, and by Mr. Trent himself, who was a methodical man with a bald head and the demeanor of someone who had been present at most things that could happen in Bath, and was not easily surprised. There were also, because the matter had spread widely enough that privacy was no longer quite possible, a dozen or so observers of the kind that attach themselves to proceedings of public interest, 2 solicitors not directly involved, 3 members of the minor gentry who happened to be in Bath for the season, a journalist from the Bath Chronicle who had been given no official standing, but had arrived early enough to secure a chair. The Dowager was present. She was seated with Miss Honoria Whitmore at her left and a member of her own solicitor's firm at her right, and she wore a gown of dove gray and a look of settled authority that said she had been managing situations of this kind for 40 years. And this one was not different. Cecily was present. She had come alone, because there was no one to come with her. And she sat in a chair on the opposite side of the room from the Dowager, and kept her hands in her lap and her back straight. And she thought about her father, who had sat in rooms like this, quieter than everyone assumed a man ought to be in such rooms, and who had always said that the difficulty with public proceedings was not the people who were loudest, but the people who had decided what had happened before anyone had spoken. The Earl was not yet there when the inquiry began. Mr. Trent opened the proceedings with the directness of a man who had a great deal else to do. He noted that the office had received a written communication from Miss Cecily Pratt, copyist, currently employed by Orton's printing establishment on Milsom Street, alleging irregularities in certain instruments prepared for distribution through that establishment. He invited Miss Pratt to speak to the substance of her communication. She had known she would be asked. She had prepared for it the same way she prepared for everything, by deciding what was true and then saying it. She described the commission. She described the signature. She described the 3 notes and the sum they represented, and the names of the men who held them. She described the Earl's visit to the printing house, and the offer he had made, and her refusal of it. She did not describe Mr. Baxter's visit or the torn banknote. She described instead what Edmund had told her in the back office, about the dead brother, the 3 families, the £3,000 already quietly paid. There was a silence in the room. Mr. Trent looked at her over his papers. "You are saying, Miss Pratt, that Lord Ashwick confirmed to you that the notes were fraudulent, and that he has been making voluntary payment toward the amounts owed?" "Yes," she said. "He told me he intended to continue paying until the full amount was settled. He believed that suppressing the forgery was wrong. He came to buy my silence in a moment of pressure, and changed his mind." She paused. "He told me the truth when he did not have to. I think that matters." She heard a chair shift across the room. She did not look. "I note," she said, "that I was named this week as the source of a leak regarding these proceedings. I was not the source of any leak. I made a single formal written communication to this office. I do not know who else communicated its content to others. Mr. Trent wrote something. He did not look at Lady Dorothea, but several of the observers did. And the Dowager's fan, which she had been holding at its particular measured height, went very still in her hand. "Miss Pratt," said Mr. Baxter's voice from across the room, speaking without being addressed, "is merely a copyist. She has characterized Lord Ashwick's position in a way that is highly sympathetic to her own interest in the proceeding. It would be unwise for this office to—" "Sit down, Baxter." The voice came from the doorway. The Earl stood in the entrance to the room with his coat showing the cold of the street, and his expression showing nothing at all. And then he crossed the room in 4 strides, and he did not sit down in the chair that had been designated for the family's representative, but stood at the center of the room where everyone could see him. "My name is Edmund Forsyth, Earl of Ashwick," he said, addressing Mr. Trent with the quiet authority of a man who has decided to stop being managed. "I will confirm, under whatever form of oath this office requires, every fact that Miss Pratt has described. The notes are fraudulent. My brother forged them. I have paid £3,000 toward the outstanding debt, and I intend to pay the remainder. I will provide a full accounting of every payment made and the schedule for the remainder to any officer of this court." The room was very quiet. He turned. He looked at Cecily. He crossed the space between them, not quickly, but with the measured deliberateness of a man who knows what he is doing and does not intend to be redirected. And he stopped in front of her, and he said, in the hearing of everyone present, including Mr. Trent and the journalist from the Bath Chronicle, and Miss Honoria Whitmore, and Lady Dorothea, with her stilled fan, "Miss Pratt does not leave this room without my name." It was not a speech. It was not an explanation. It was 12 words that closed every door that had been open. Lady Dorothea said something. Cecily heard the sound of it without quite registering the words, because she was looking at Edmund's face, which was very close, and which had, for the first time in her experience of it, ceased to arrange itself into anything at all, and was simply showing her what was underneath. It was not cold. It was tired, and careful, and certain. And something else that she thought might be the thing she had been told was not available to her, the thing she had stopped expecting when she buried her father and came to Bath alone. Miss Whitmore said distinctly, "Dorothea." The dowager's voice stopped. Mr. Trent said, with great composure, "Lord Ashwick, will you be available to this office for further proceedings as the matter requires?" "Yes," Edmund said, without looking away from Cecily. "I will." The room began to reorganize itself around the new fact of what had just happened. The journalist wrote something. The solicitors conferred in low voices. Miss Whitmore guided Lady Dorothea toward the door with the efficient care of a woman who has understood that the scene has concluded, and nothing further is to be gained by remaining in it. The dowager paused at the threshold and looked back once, and what was in her face was not fury, which Cecily had braced for, but something quieter and more difficult. The recognition of a woman who had managed a great deal for a great many years and had, this once, been outmaneuvered by someone she had decided in advance could not do it. Then she was gone. Mrs. Good had come to Cecily's lodgings on the Thursday before, without being asked, and had stayed for an hour, and had said very little, and had left a pot of tea and a plate of shortbread, and the specific comfort of someone who does not require you to explain yourself. Cecily had eaten the shortbread in the dark, and thought that small kindnesses were, in the end, the better part of human experience, and that she hoped she had managed to be one herself occasionally. She thought of this on the Monday evening after the inquiry, when she was sitting by the fire in the small sitting room of the lodgings she would be able to keep now, because Mr. Orton had sent a note that afternoon restoring her position with an additional 8 shillings to the weekly sum, and her father's letter was in her hand, unfolded, resting in her palm like something that had done its work and was ready to rest. Edmund had called that evening. He had sat in the chair across from hers, with the formal upright posture of a man who was not yet certain of his welcome, and did not intend to presume it. And he had asked her, and for the first time she noted he had asked, rather than offered or instructed, whether she would permit him to call again. She had said yes. He had stayed for an hour, and they had spoken about her father, and about his brother, and about the 3 families in Bath to whom she had already written, because it had occurred to her that they ought to know that the amounts they were owed had not been abandoned. And Edmund had looked at her when she described writing those letters with an expression she recognized now as the particular astonishment of a man who has had the ground he thought was empty turn out to hold something. When he left, he had paused at the door and said her name. Not Miss Pratt, but Cecily, the first time he had used it, and he had spoken it with a care that suggested he understood it was not a casual thing, the first time a man says a woman's given name and means it entirely. "Cecily," he said. She looked at him. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. By the following spring, the debt to the three families had been settled in full, confirmed by a document prepared by solicitors on both sides and witnessed by Mr. Trent himself. The Glovers family sent Cecily a pair of pale kid gloves in thanks, which arrived without a card, and which she kept folded in the top drawer of her writing desk. The book dealer on Broad Street closed with a note of gratitude and opened the following summer twice the size. The silversmith's daughter was married in June to a young man from Bristol, and the wedding was attended, quietly, by no one from the Forsyth family, because Edmund had felt it was not his place to intrude on a celebration he had been unable to prevent from nearly being cancelled. He had married Cecily in March, at the same parish church where she had first attended service after arriving in Bath, in a ceremony witnessed by Mr. Orton and Mrs. Good, and two of Edmund's cousins who had the sense to be pleased rather than surprised. Lady Dorothea had not attended. She had sent a brief letter, which Cecily had read once and put away in a drawer she did not often open. Miss Honoria Whitmore had been engaged by Christmas to a baronet in Wiltshire, and had sent, to Cecily's genuine astonishment, a very correct congratulatory card. On an evening in late April, with the windows of the house in Camden Place open to the first warmth of the season, Cecily sat at the writing desk in the room that was now hers, and the letter was in her hands, and the light from the candle on the desk fell across the words she knew by heart. Edmund came in from the hall and stopped in the doorway when he saw what she was holding. "Your father's letter," he said. "Yes." She looked up at him. "I was going to put it away, in the good place, where I keep the things I want to keep properly." He came across the room and sat in the chair beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. He held out his hand, and she gave him the letter, and he read it, slowly, in the candlelight, and when he reached the last line he was quiet for a moment. "He was right," he said. He usually was. Edmund refolded the letter along its 4 careful creases and set it in her hand. She folded her fingers around it. Outside, the spring evening was mild and specific, the kind of night that holds whatever has been built into it. And the candle burned steady between them. And the house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when they have been claimed by the people who live in them. She kept the letter. She kept everything her father gave her. She had learned by now that some things were not for keeping behind glass, but for carrying close and wearing warm and spending freely until they became simply the texture of the person you had managed to be.